this book club started about 2.5 years ago when, as a psychologist, I offered to help people around the US find mental health care because there are so many barriers to finding mental health care and a lot of people don't know where to start. And oh, someone says no voice. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, maybe
Okay.
they need to turn the sound on the phone up or something
Okay.
like that.
Um, and as many people reached out to me, so many other people said, either I don't have the resources right now to have therapy, or I don't have the privacy, or I don't feel like I have the time, but are there books you can point me in the direction to? And so I realized that there was this big need for people to learn about books out there that could help point them in the right direction. And I think that your book fits so well into the various books that that we have read, and so thank you for being here and joining
Yeah,
us.
thanks for inviting me.
So I'll give some brief background information about you, although everyone here knows who you are as they've read the book, but we are so lucky today to have Cory Allen. And Cory Allen is an author and a podcast host who is widely recognized for writing about mindfulness and mental clarity. And in your podcast, or in his podcast, And Then It Hit Me, he speaks with leaders in self-development. And of course, he's also the author of Brave New You, a roadmap to believing that more is possible. I will just say, on a personal level, so much of what you said, I enjoyed reading. I guess for like a selfish reason, and that is that as my work as a clinical psychologist, my primary modality of therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy. And so
Mm.
much of what you write about aligns so closely with cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And so I feel like I got a kick of and actually learned so much hearing the way you described it, and made me rethink like ways that I can describe some of the things that I talk about in my day-to-day work. So, thank you for that. I want to start with a question of mine and then jump into questions that members of the book club wrote in about. And that is, if you're comfortable sharing, what was the last internal portal and external portal that you passed through?
That's a good question. Let's see. So first off, I want to say, thank you for having me, and I appreciate that you noticed and talked about how I described CBT in the book, because that's not an accident. I definitely am aware of CBT, and if you just, but I find that blending that and mindfulness techniques and
Yeah.
sort of looking at it from a different perspective is super valuable. And so I just appreciate that you caught that.
Yeah,
This,
you explained it so well, better than I sometimes do in my work as a CBT therapist. So
Thank you. All right, so let's see. The last portal that I entered, I think it was probably for this book. I mean, I may be entering one right now, like in the last couple of days, but we'll see. We'll talk about that's for another time. Um, yeah, maybe with this book, I was like trying to. I spent a lot of time, I think a couple of years just paying attention for ideas of what might be the best thing to follow up my first book, which was called Now is the Way, which was mainly just about a modern view on presence and mindfulness. And I went through a lot of different iterations of ideas, and the invitation part of the portal, the opening, was instead of me telling people like, here's what you need, here's what the world needs right now, I thought, let me look at the kind of the feedback I'm getting online, because my writing reaches like 1 million people a week, and with the comments, the DMs, the reactions, like the engagement, what is it out there in the world that people are really, really um, trying to get to? And so I allowed myself to just kind of be open and listen to the cultural mind, and that was a really interesting way to move into discovering what it was that I wanted to share with people. So I think for me, that was probably the last big one, was having this big flip from, I have this idea that I know I want to share with people, to let me open up, create a bunch of space, and just receive what needs to be shared.
and did that feel like, after having written a book already, did it feel like an entirely new portal? Like, does each book like feel like a new portal, or does it feel like there are just multiple doors and in the same portal?
Oh no, it's like it feels like a total different lifetime. Like I wasn't joking in the very beginning, at the end of the first chapter of the book, whenever I write that this realization dawned on me, or this feeling and insight that it's like, um, you know, I say something to the effect of, I think reincarnation is real, but it's not about another lifetime. It's about every single day, whenever you wake
Yeah.
up, you can be whoever you want to be. It's a new opportunity, a whole new life. And I really feel like that on a day-to-day basis, which I suppose it's good because a lot of like the classical Zen and things I've read, there's a beautiful quote in there that stuck with me for 20 years or something. And it's like, whenever you're really experiencing the present moment, you'll feel like a tourist in your hometown. And that speaks to the notion of just being open to a level with your awareness and being present enough that you're not shaving down this your experience of reality. You're not assuming what's going to happen. You're not numb to life that's swirling around you, even though maybe you've been somewhere before. If you stop and actually let go of your assumption and look at life with fresh eyes in any given moment, it's a new moment. Everything has changed. You've changed. Reality has shifted. And if you can stay in that moment, then indeed, your own hometown will begin to look a little unfamiliar and more exciting, and you'll see things you hadn't seen. So I feel like that way about life. And for me, writing the second book was very much just like a different person. Like it's just a totally different experience. Totally, I think different. I have different goals. I have different things, values, things that are important. Yeah, it's completely different.
Were there things that you learned about yourself in writing this book?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, let's see. What did I learn about myself in this book? I think one thing that I suspected, but was definitely clearer in writing this book was that I don't like using myself as the point of focus whenever I'm writing, because that's always something I try and do, like in talking on my podcast or in writing in general. I don't really use examples from my life.
Yeah.
And people always urge me to. People, I should say, people urge everyone to. It's like, use yourself as an example, write a story. And I'm like, that's not really how I do things. Like I like to, I like to write like stuff that is about the reader. It's like it makes it about them. It makes it to where whatever they're experiencing something, they can look at that and go, hey, this is to do with me. This is my story that's evolving, as opposed to them trying to follow along to my story. So I liked that approach.
And I think that it's so unique in this like self-help world. And I'm curious too. You have a section of the book that I thought was very interesting and rings very true about um, I don't know about like being wary about self-help, but about being, I guess, mindful of the self-help that you're consuming and the amount that you're consuming. And I'm curious what that was like for you, like writing a book about personal development, and in that book critiquing, for lack of a better term, some self-help and self-development culture.
Yeah, well, I think that any um, like any school of thought, it is still just a system of ideas. And I think that all of those ideas need to be examined. And I think that the valuable parts of them need to be pointed out. And I think that the weak parts of them, or parts that are open to creating more delusion or creating more problems, need to be pointed out and clarified. And so for me, I think that just trying to give somebody give the reader a way of looking at things where they need to decide what's right for them, not only just in self-development, but in life in general. It's like kind of empowering them to think for themselves, to um, really test ideas, not just assume that what's being shown to them. It's like, okay, cool, this is the law. I have to follow this now. It's like, no, like that's just someone else's idea, or that's some published idea or something. Like play with it, get in the laboratory of your own life, your own mind, try it out a little bit. And if it's cool and like it feels good, then that's great. If it's not, then it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything about you or your path, your journey. And I think that that's just really an important part of personal development, particularly because it's so ephemeral and so personal and so internal
Yeah.
that I think it's easy to get off track. It's easy to get influenced by other things. And so just having that sort of critical view is, I think, really valuable.
And I guess, like, related to that, a lot of people wrote in, I think probably based on the same section, asking about how to know how much um, how much self-help to be consuming at once. And someone wrote in saying, I appreciated your section on the overconsumption of self-help content, as I sometimes think the world and social media specifically is saturated with it. How should I know how much self-help content to consume at once? Should people only focus on one goal at a time? Or is there a trial period of seeing how much content someone can handle before becoming overwhelmed and not making a change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's again, that's just sort of useful to think about because a lot of people will get on the path of trying to take in a bunch of self-help content and material, and ultimately that can kind of become the pursuit as of like just the consumption of content can become the pursuit as opposed to actually focusing on what you're doing in your original goal of what the things you might want to change in your life are.
And I like, do you think that habit of people just consuming more is subconsciously because they're hesitant to actually make the change, and so they're almost in perhaps the contemplation stage, and so they want to be consuming more to decide when to make the change? Or do you think that it's just not like necessarily being cognizant of what's helping them and what's keeping them stuck?
Well, I think people just don't know what they don't know, and so it generally like, anyone's going to come to some type of self-development work because they are suffering in some way, and typically they're going to be looking for it on social media or in books because that's what's available to them.
Yeah.
And so they'll go and they'll start consuming that content, but they won't really know at that point in their journey or in their experience that they need to be making that stuff actionable. And so they think sort of, oh, if I just read enough about this stuff, it will create change eventually. But that's only the kind of second part of it. One is self-discovery. Two is finding the tools that are useful. And three is actually using the tools. And so it just takes people a little bit of time, I think, and to kind of get their bearings and to figure out how to actually start making some of the stuff actionable.
Yeah. And I see someone wrote in here saying, that people often seek the fix rather than being the fix. And I think that
Yes.
Aligns with what you're saying in terms of, you know, seeking it or hoping that consuming the content will somehow make the change. I think is probably a common misconception, but is a misconception nonetheless, that you can like read all you want or look at as many, Instagram posts or listen to as many podcasts, but unless you're then reflecting on like what's resonating with you and how you're going to make the change, that the cycle probably just keeps happening again and again.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you think about it like someone who's interested in becoming a chef, if all you do are watch cooking shows,
Right.
you're not going to be a great chef. What you do is watch some cooking shows, maybe look at some lessons on YouTube, then go into the kitchen and actually experiment a little bit, figure out what tastes like what techniques of this and that, and then slowly get better all the time while continuing to do that stuff if you so desire. I think this just works in the exact same way.
Yeah. Someone had written in asking, how can you tell the difference between being stuck in the contemplation stage because you're hesitant about change versus being stuck in contemplation because something isn't as high a priority as other changes you need or want to make?
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I think again, that would just be doing some self-clarifying techniques would be valuable there, in really understanding like, I mean, generally we shouldn't really ever be stuck in the contemplation stage, I would say, really, ultimately. It's like, if you realize that you are considering a change, that would be the moment to take action. I think I would say actually that just the timelines of those two changes maybe are operating on different levels. But if you're realizing it and you're not doing anything at all, then you probably are just validating being stuck in contemplation as opposed to trying to decide. And I think a lot of times, like, you know, we're often not going to be, I think, having multiple things battle in our contemplation stage. Um, I think generally the stage of change model is dealing with pretty sizable things in life, and so generally I think it would become clear. But my advice to anyone that's like has two things that they're sort of throwing back and forth, going, well, I don't know what which one am I doing here? Which one do I prioritize? I mean, you can do two things at once. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you do you think that, like, when it comes to changing habits, for example, um, do you,
you can
do you think
you can by the way, Sarah, you can block the people like
I'm doing it as um,
okay, yeah.
I think unfortunately new people just
It's just the same person using different bot like fake accounts, you know.
um, yeah, sorry about this. I've actually never had this happen. So, so um, like when it comes to habit formation, do you think that multiple habits can be like developed at the same time, or do you think that that can sometimes also get in the way of like creating the cycle that you talked about, in which people start doing a habit? I guess you can't even call it a habit. Like, try to make change for a few days and then leave it for a few weeks. I guess, like, how much interference do you think exists when too much tries to be changed at once?
Yeah, I think the main issue there is just overwhelming
Yeah.
yourself. I think it's smart to focus on one thing at a time and at least get it off the ground. Because if you instead of going like, I'm gonna change everything, I'm gonna change my whole life, I'm gonna do this, and this, it's like cut it down to like just a couple of things, maybe even one. Make sure that you can build and really establish that new habit and see it through. And then what I would do, which I think would be a cool thing, is like use that the excitement of the next change you want to make to motivate you to complete the first one that you're already in.
Yeah.
So if you're like, I want to start meditating and like running 2 miles every day, then you'll say, okay, well, here's what I'll do first. I'm going to start meditating. I'm going to do that every day for 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, once that starts feeling pretty baked in, then I'll start my, running or whatever, just to kind of showing the example. You can make it towards something that you're looking forward to. So you kind of get this motivating factor, and then you can keep on adding new things that you want to change in each segment. And that way you're always kind of motivating yourself and building this whole new foundation.
I guess I don't think you talk a lot about like the shoulds of the world, but I think often change is. Am I misremembering that? You don't talk about shoulds, do you?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Um, like I think, and I hear this so much, like in both my personal life and my professional life, people deciding to try to create habits or engage in habits because they feel like they should, right? The language is often, I feel like I should be doing this, or other people think I should be doing this. And, I'm curious your thoughts on that. That, I guess in my opinion, what motivates change should be what we want rather than what we feel like we should be doing. But I'm curious if you think that those should statements ever can be helpful in motivating change.
Yeah, I mean, not really. I think Timothy Leary had a great quote where he said, "I'm tired of being should upon all the time," you know, and that's uh, that's kind of the way I see it too. No real long-term change motivation is going to come from someone else telling you that you need to do
Yeah.
something. You have to just find the value and the meaning and the purpose of it for yourself, and have it be intrinsic as opposed to an extrinsic type of motivation. One of the things that I like to that I kind of address as far as that goes. Like if you're on the other side of that and you are the shooter, the person who's telling people,
Yeah.
"Hey, you should do this or that." Like the best way to do that is just to live by example, because that's a way to intrinsically motivate someone, which that means, getting someone excited about it for themselves, making it meaningful for them, something that they want to do as opposed to something they're being told to do. So by living by example, because someone who might want to make this change, they'll see you living a certain way and they'll go like, oh, that person looks happier, they look more calm, they seem a lot more sharp and clear-minded or whatever. I want to be like that. And then they'll generally ask like, so what are you doing? Like, what are you sleeping 10 hours a day? Are you meditating for 2 hours a day? What are you eating? So that's kind of a good way to motivate people, is just show up really, really wonderfully for them.
And I think you talk so eloquently about that in the section about once we ourselves have made change, that then it's common for us to have a desire for other people to make change. And I think that one of the hard things about being social animals is that I guess hard but also beautiful things is that we can't control other people, right? And that I think it can be especially hard, whether it be about mental health or habits that we don't think are, um, super adaptive, or relationships that we don't see the people we care about in that are healthy. Not being able to tell someone like, you should consume this content and see the change you have to make, or this is like a change that would be good, and often that risks isolating the person. And I think, you're saying that the best way to teach is to lead by example, I think is a really great way to say it, because then people can have the reflection themselves and, develop the desire to change as they see fit and in their own timeline, which
Yeah.
is, the best chance that it will actually happen.
100%. Yeah.
Someone had written in, and I'm not sure what it was referring to, saying, what's the best methods that work? So I don't know if that person wants to clarify that question. And someone else wrote in saying, being in should doesn't embrace our inner knowing, guidance, and trust. And I think that is very, very true. And I think often, the shoulds might come from other people, but often we're creating the shoulds about ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're projecting them onto other people and assuming that that's how other people think we should be acting, but that, it's really from within, and that it takes introspection and mindfulness to realize that that's not, there's no real source to the should except for ourselves, and that the best way to overcome that should is to become comfortable with who you are and what you want to do, rather than what you're telling yourself you should do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's so much pressure in life that's put onto us by society and by, family members or anything like that. And that we have to be hitting these certain beats of life, that we have to do these things in order to meet their standards. And that's one of the things that I say, I think in the book, is like, don't feel guilty for not meeting the standards that you never agreed to in the first place.
Yeah.
It's like other people will have all this to say, or they'll insinuate all this pressure on you, but really none of it matters. None of it matters at all. Like the only thing that matters is what feels right to you, what you want to do in your life, and just remembering that is really valuable.
Yeah. Someone, like a lot of people wrote in, it's always interesting seeing the themes that come up, because, I think that there are questions that, if I were to generate all the questions I would ask, and I'm always find it interesting, the questions that other readers write in. A lot of people wrote about navigating risk. And so someone wrote in and said, how do you suggest people balance recognizing a portal with navigating a severe risk that the portal may bring? And I guess to add to it, and you can answer either or both questions, but they were similar. Someone asked, what tips do you have for leaving what feels safe to pursue what's possible, especially if the possible feels risky?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so the risk factor of moving into a portal, I would say, with anything, you have to be realistic about what you're doing, and you have to decide and get clear on the risk reward of any type of situation. There's going to be a risk factor in anything, but you have to just choose, like, is this one I'm willing to take? And that's really what it comes down to. It's like just getting really clear with yourself and mapping it out. Like, here are some possible outcomes of this. Here's how it might go well. Here's how it might not go well. Here's how it might be unexpected, and just deciding if the instability of that is worth, in this moment in time, if you're ready to do that, as opposed in sacrifice the stability that you know. I think it's just important to do that because, it's very easy to be radical, and that feels maybe exciting to people, but ultimately that's impulsivity. And regardless of, even if it's a good choice, impulsivity is still a reaction. And a reaction generally is done to further or because of some type of delusion. So it's just good to slow things down, get clear about things, and really sort of look at things from 360 degrees to understand if you're willing to take that risk or not. And there's a lot of different tips, like, mentioning some tips you could think about, like write down, I would say, what's the best case scenario of how something could work out, and then writing down, like, what's the worst case scenario of how this could work out, and look at those both and say, am I okay with those really happening? Either one, the good one or the bad one. And if you feel like you are and you can handle it, then that's a good sign. Or if it feels like, no, that's not something I'm willing to go through or put myself in a position to experience, then you know that the intensity of that decision that you're considering making might not be for you at this moment in time.
Do you think, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this question. Someone just said that those are good tips, and I agree. And someone else wrote in saying that this book is wonderful, which it is. Do you think that most portals in life, if you don't go through them at the time they present themselves, a similar portal will open up in the future? Do you see portals as a one-time opportunity?
I see them as time and place things. They're not one-time opportunities, but I think that every idea has its moment. I think every potential thing that's arising in you and in life all has its moment. And the nice thing is that portals will open again, of course, but they'll present themselves in a different way. And that's just because you've changed as time has gone on, and the world has changed as time has gone on. Culture has changed. And so things won't present themselves in the same way twice.
Yeah.
But things will continue to present themselves. And it's just a matter of being open enough to see them. And that becomes one of the challenges, is seeing yourself with as little prejudice as possible, to be able to see your own ability in those moments whenever the opportunities arise.
Yeah. And I guess I wonder, and maybe these questions are too like black and white, and it's not like as simple as this, but my instinct, and someone wrote in saying that she loves how you explain portals in the book. My instinct, and again, it's not so black and white, is that people are often more likely to regret not passing through a portal than they are to regret passing through one. And obviously there are exceptions to that, in which there could be a lot of loss and no gain. But do you think that that's true, or do you think it really depends on the portal?
I mean, it depends on the portal, the person, the timing, all these type of things. But I mean, generally, if someone, I think, has a grounded feeling that
Yeah.
it's something that is drawing them in, then it usually works out. And but the other thing is that it generally works out in the way that a person didn't expect. I think that's kind of a beautiful part of
Yeah.
this too, is that, like, there are like these points in our lives that are in our professional or personal journeys, or in our relationships, wherever, that are really valuable. But generally, we have the idea that they're going to be this way, and so we will move towards one thing to realize that, and then that situation won't work out, but it will lead us to something else. And then that might not work out, but that will lead us to the next thing, and so on and so on and so on, until we find what it is that's really meant for us. And the challenging part about that is just recognizing that each of those stops along the way is a necessary part of the process. Because what's happening is you're discovering more about yourself, you're discovering what you really want, and you're also discovering how you can collaborate with reality in a way that you hadn't known before. But it just goes through sort of peeling away the process of taking those different tangents to figure that out. And I think that the more that you can be unbiased against your own path and your own journey and just allow it to unfold and continue following your instincts, then then the better off that you'll be.
And I guess, and a couple people had wrote in asking what portals are, which is, a big part of the last part of your book. Is there a concise way, because I assume most people here do know, that you can summarize it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's essentially like it's how I describe a moment of opportunity that opens for you. And it's one of these opportunities that you have to be paying attention for. And if you are just going in your normal behavior patterns, not looking for opportunity and possibility, you won't see these potential openings. But whenever you see them and you recognize them and then you respect them and you're present with them and you start moving towards them, then that's whenever interesting new things can happen in your life that lead to other, bigger things than you would have expected. Another point that I put in there that's just a nuance that I've discovered that I think is really interesting is that these things would generally present themselves in, like, it'll be two aspects of your personality or your skill set that are really valuable that you hadn't considered joining before. And so these portals will invite you to join these two aspects of self together that you hadn't considered. In the freshness of that self connection creates this really valuable skill and ability to create something in the world. So, like, I would say an example of that is like, you know, um, if I, way back in the day before I started a podcast, I was a music producer, and I would go on my friend's podcast, and his friends would, his listeners would hit me up and say, "Hey, you should start a podcast," and so on and so on. I'd never considered that before, but I was like, "Oh well, I'm always just talking about this stuff anyway. This is pretty cool, and maybe I should start a podcast." And I'm a music producer. I have a studio and all of the equipment to do it right here. So let me put these two things together, and boom, now 10 years later, the podcast is still going, and it was a huge part of my growth and development.
And I think one thing that you point out that is so important is I think often when change happens, particularly good change, um, people look at it as, and someone just wrote in saying that your podcast is everything. That people look at change as something that passively happens to them. And I think that in your description of portals, you do such a good job of reminding people that a portal is something that they choose to go through, right? That they are an active participant in the change that's happening. Because I think that people disempower themselves by thinking of it as, oh, this change happened to me. Or like so often I hear, oh yeah, that was good, but that was
Yeah.
lucky. Right. And trying to help people understand that sometimes things are lucky, but sometimes you create your own luck, right?
Oh,
And
totally.
it's not actually luck. And I think you do a great job of describing that.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah. It's like so much of, I feel like that's one of the big things that holds people back is that they sit and they think that they have an idea of how they want their life to change or what they want to accomplish. But then they sit around and wait for life to happen to them,
yeah.
and they don't actually do it. But really making that change, reaching that level of success, it takes consistency. That's like one of the things I put in my first book is, consistent effort plus time equals lasting change. I mean, that's really the formula, but we tend to forget that sometimes. And then it becomes easy to sort of, like, if you have an idea of what you'd like to do and then sit around sort of waiting for it to happen for you, then it's very easy to start making excuses about why it didn't happen, or feel jaded or feel frustrated or whatever like that, instead of actually ever trying to make it work.
Yeah. Um, One like final question before kind of let you tell people where they can consume more of your wonderful work and remind people the name of the podcast. Um, Someone wrote in asking, in your section about being mindful of who you're with, do you think there are times when someone in a relationship does more of the feeding and other times when the same person is fed more? Or do you think that there should always be a somewhat equal balance of the two?
And what do they mean feeding?
So I think there was a section in your book that you talked about like feeding,
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah,
well, like the metaphorical feeding that
yeah.
I can't remember exactly where it was, but there was a section in which you talked about like when you're feeding people metaphorically versus being fed, and if you're always the one doing the feeding, that you need to kind of take an inventory of the value of the relationship.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, that's where I'm breaking down sort of relationship dynamics, where you have what I call the upward flow, downward flow, and synergetic flow. The upward flow is like whenever you have a friend that, or someone in your life that you're always giving, energy to, then they're always kind of taking. That's a downward flow. If it's someone that you're always taking from and they're always giving to you, or that would be a downward flow for you. And if it's synergetic, is that every time you're with that person, you feel energized and they feel energized. So you're both feeding each other. And I just point out that I think those are the best type of relationships to have. In terms of like being in one where you always feel like you're feeding and you feel like the other person's always taking, is that good? I mean, I would say no. I mean, it's easy to generalize. Of course, I'm sure there's a lot of nuance and aspects to it. But one of the things I've written before is if you're not being fed, you're probably being eaten, and so it's worth considering that. And I think also if someone is asking that question, then that itself, the fact that they had the desire to ask that question suggests that they should look at that situation more closely.
And I think, well, like part of the question, and maybe I didn't understand it correctly, is like, do you think there are times when it ebbs and flows,
Oh,
right? That like there's
yeah.
like periods of life in which you're the one doing more of the feeding, and periods of life in which the other person is doing more of the feeding? Or do you think that in healthy relationships, whether they be romantic or platonic or work relationships, that there should always be like an equal level of reciprocation or somewhat equal level?
Yeah, for sure. So in my experience, I would say that generally there should be a grounded middle. But I think that what happens just over the span of time is that the weight kind of will just slowly shift sort of back and forth again and again. And it makes sense too if we think about it, just it's literal balance that's going on. If life is like pushing us and creating motion, as long as we have a strong center where we're always both contributing somewhat and receiving somewhat, then the larger timetables where kind of we'll go into a zone where someone needs a little bit more, love and a little bit more assistance. Then as long as that flips back around, the other person gets the nurturing and the supports they need and back and forth, then you're really creating an organic sense of balance. And I think that's totally fine. I think that's just seemingly natural in most relationships.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm mindful of time. Thank you so much again for joining our book club and being the July book, even though it's August 1st, for your book, Brave New You. Can you share with everyone, if they've read your book and loved it, as I know so many people have, like where they can consume more of you and, your wisdom?
Yeah, of course. They can follow me on Instagram. The book is on Amazon or at any good bookstore where they might go. Also on Audible as well. I read the book on Audible. I narrated it. And you can come over to my newsletter, Substack. There's a lot of writing there. And yeah, I say those are the best places.
And I guess, what about the podcast, which I know we mentioned at
Oh,
the
yeah.
beginning, but do you want to talk a little bit about the
Yeah,
podcast?
sure. Sure. It used to be called the Astro Hustle way back in the day, but now it's called And Then It Hit Me. and it's available everywhere. And also, I have a Patreon as well. So I have stuff happening everywhere. My Patreon is just patreon.com/Cory Allen. There's a lot of solo podcasts and music and guided meditations and things there.
And I see people writing and saying that they love your podcast and that your channel is awesome on Instagram. So you are helping so many people in so many different ways. And thank you so much again for joining our live discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.